Okay, so in this video we're going to be talking about the central nervous system, periphery nervous system, particularly the autonomic nervous system that breaks down into two separate branches, one being the sympathetic nervous system, the other being the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, these two are in complete contrast to one another. Your sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight modality, okay, so releasing adrenaline, noradrenaline, epinephrine, norepinephrine. It's a stressed state typically. Whether we really notice it as being stress or not is debatable. I mean, when you're pushing through an intense workout, you know that there is stress, there's demand on the body. But there's acute stresses as well in our environment, things like pollution, noise, dirty EMF radiation, things like that also apply stress on the body. When this happens, like I said, adrenaline, noradrenaline, so you'll get a release of cortisol from the adrenal cortex. Basically the cortex sits just on top of the adrenals. That will release cortisol, and people might have heard of cortisol. It's a chemical that is it is stress. When there's stress in the body, cortisol is released alongside adrenaline, and it puts you in that sympathetic state, okay? Your fight or flight, your stressed state. So when we're talking about stress, just to note there, it can be real stress or perceived stress. So real stress, like I was saying, if you're doing an intense workout, if you're training hard, something like that, it's real stress. Now, perceived stress can be things that you don't necessarily, it's not an actual stress, but you're thinking it might be. So things such as your future, financial security, friendships, relationships, things like that. You might be perceiving that as a stress because you might be worried or concerned about something, things that you see on TV, through the media, things that happen in the world, atrocities, things like that. So they can be perceived stress because whilst that's not actually directly affecting you right now in the moment, it's still registering in the body and in the mind, and it's creating that stress response. So, on the contrary, the parasympathetic nervous system is your rest and digest, okay? So it's all about recovery. So rather than releasing adrenaline, noradrenaline, epinephrine, this will be releasing acetylcholine. Now, again, it's all about relaxing, rest and digest. So under the parasympathetic, you'll have vasodilation, so dilation of arteries, whereas in the sympathetic, it'll be vasoconstriction. Heart rate lowered, and yeah, like I say, recovery, resting. Now, just want to point out green zones and blue zones. So living in and around nature or by the coastline, green and blue zones, mountainous areas, things like that, where you're closely linked with nature, these tend to have a good response with the parasympathetic nervous system, and they also yield higher life expectancy and lower all-cause mortality. So yeah, again, control and security. If you don't feel like you have security in an aspect of your life or control over whatever you're doing, how you're living, financial security, family, stress, things like that, whatever it is, if you feel control and security, then you're more likely going to be over into the parasympathetic nervous system rather than the sympathetic, because sympathetic involves stress. So that kind of talks about the pair of them. Most of us spend a lot of time in the sympathetic nervous system, you know, sleep deprivation, stimulants such as caffeine, refined sugars, processed foods, lots of toxic pollution and EMFs in the atmosphere and in our environment. We don't spend enough time in the parasympathetic, and there's exercises to actually overcome that and to get into the parasympathetic nervous system. Things such as belly breathing, so engaging the diaphragm in your breaths, doing some box breathing, trying to do some sensory deprivation, and just immersing yourself in nature more, getting more out into green and blue zones. Things like that can really help with your stress. And any other stress management tool that you know or you implement into your life is guaranteed to put you more over into the parasympathetic nervous system, which is going to be a lot more healthier for your life, essentially. So that pretty much covers the differences between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. Again, the sympathetic is your fight or flight modality, and is completely involved around stress, release of cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline. Your parasympathetic, on the contrary, is your rest and digest. So recovery, whether that's through box breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, belly breaths, things like that. It's important, especially if you're into training as well. If you're training very intensely, but in that mode all the time, if you're not scaling back at times, and when you're away from the gym, engaging the parasympathetic nervous system, you will end up just putting too much stress on the body, and rather than necessarily calling it overtraining, you'll be under recovering, and that's also an issue. So with your training as well, but just in general in life, there's your sympathetic and your parasympathetic, and we experience it throughout every aspect of our life. So hopefully that did give some kind of idea, an overview of the two separate branches. And if you want any more information on this or on anything else, give me a message, DM, or anything, and I'll try to get back to you, and I'll try to get more videos out